Hello and welcome to Violets and Tea's virtual garden tour. My name is Eliza Ford. I'm the founder of Violets and Tea. We specialise in lovely tours to absolutely beautiful English gardens.
So I'm very excited today to be at one of my personal favourite gardens, the garden at Miserden.
There's been a homestead on this site for some 1,000 years.
It was first mentioned in the Domesday Book of 1086. Today we will be meeting with Major Tom Wills and his son Nicholas Wills, who is the current owner and custodian of this absolutely spectacular place. Major Tom and Nicholas will guide us around and talk to us about the garden's history and their involvement in its development.
So without further ado, if you'd like to follow me in, let's get started.
Miserden is situated in an area of outstanding natural beauty in the Cotswolds. It is approximately 1 hour drive north of Bath and 2.5 hours drive northwest of London.
The gardens at Miserden are part of the wider Miserden estate, which is a slightly unusual estate in that it also includes the local village of Miserden. Once common, there are now less than a dozen privately owned villages across England, making this peaceful corner of the Cotswolds a unique and special place. Miserden is not particularly well known outside of England and only receives about 6,000 visitors a year. Personally, I find that this adds to the charm of the gardens, as you can wander through and have the place to enjoy all to yourself. Today we will be exploring the stunning formal gardens and the serene arboretum, seeing how the gardens are being invigorated and learning about the history of the estate, including the role the estate played in supporting the Allied efforts in World War II. And it all starts with the garden's last custodian, Major Tom Wills.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We were hoping to hear a little bit more about you and your association with Miserden.
Well, I was born in Alexandria during the war, 1940. My father was serving out there and he was killed actually. And
you came to Miserden at that
well, my
point?
grandmother was living here, so we came here when we got back to England. Because at that stage I had no knowledge that I would succeed to the ownership of Miserden. My father having been killed, I succeeded a generation sooner than I might have, and then joined the army. I just missed national service by a month, but my stepfather said, well, 3 years in the army won't do any harm. So, and stayed for 13 years and enjoyed it very much. When I left the army, I came back to a cottage in the village here, and I went to the agricultural college for 2 years to learn about farming and forestry. Took on from my grandmother. I had a Canadian husband because she married this Canadian during the war, and he'd been a schoolmaster in Canada, but he taught himself about estate management, and he had the best interests of the estate at heart.
Yes.
And he ran it very well until I took over.
When did you take over?
I suppose I took over in 1968 when I got married, moved into the park, and 2 children, Nicholas and Camilla.
And do you still live on the estate?
I live in a house in the village. I try not to interfere, but probably do interfere.
Do you come down every day?
Most days, it sort of grows on one somehow.
And your big interests are the trees?
Yes, particularly. We had a very nice lecturer in forestry at the Cirencester Agricultural College, and he inspired me around it, and I then became a member of the Royal Forestry Society and also the International Dendrology Society, and you get inspired and ideas by looking at other people's plantations and gardens.
The first time that I came here was in the last week of September, and I came through the old gates and I made a beeline straight to your arboretum because there was the most stunning Cercidifilum, which is one of my favourite trees.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. And then at the glorious view over the Golden Valley as well, and all the leaves were starting to turn.
Yeah, no, the early autumn's always a nice time.
Do you have a favourite tree?
I mean, I suppose this
Too
copper
many.
beech behind, I mean, that's quite a significant tree. There's this sycamore, which is obviously landed just as a sapling because it's grown out of the wall and was allowed to stay. It's quite a striking tree. And there are a lot of trees down the drive which are quite old and tall. The Norman castle at the bottom of the drive, and the last occupant there was called Musard, M-U-S-A-R-D, from which the village took its name, because previous to that the village was called Green Hampstead. We're very lucky that the whole village belongs to the estate, so every house is occupied by a tenant, and we choose our tenants quite carefully. And so we try and involve the community in taking an interest in the facilities which are available, but volunteers do come forward.
It's time to head to Major Tom's wonderful arboretum stretching across the southwest front of the formal gardens.
This is the oldest tree in the garden, which probably predates the house, because James I decreed that every manor house should have a mulberry to support the silk industry. We've propped it up twice, and it did lose a limb last year, and it's completely hollow in the middle. You can see right through it. It hasn't fruited this year, but most years it fruits really well.
As we descend into the shade of the arboretum, we can feel the temperature drop. Today is a warm 30 degrees Celsius, or about 85 in Fahrenheit, and the arboretum makes a pleasant change. This area used to be a rockery, which was very fashionable in gardening circles when these gardens were first laid out in the early 1920s by Major Tom's grandmother. But as this area sits on a slope facing away from the manor house, it can't be viewed from the house itself. So Major Tom cleared away the rocks and started planting the arboretum that we see before us, with the added benefit that the crowns of the trees, their fresh spring foliage and their glorious autumn colours can be viewed from the house throughout the year. As we stroll through the arboretum, Major Tom points out its defining specimen trees and his favourite highlights.
The two deer just at the end, you see the bronze, which just give us a focal point. But there's a spring actually a bit further on, feed the trough in the field.
Over the years, Major Tom has added to the collection of trees here, and it now contains a blended mix of young and old trees chosen for year-round interest and sentimental value. It's clear that Major Tom is so passionate about the arboretum, and there is a strong sense of planning for the future and of building a legacy. Major Tom and I can't help but discuss our favourites as we enjoy the shade.
Cupressus.
Yeah.
And with the yellow white beam behind, just sort of reflects the yellow off the cupressus. I think one of the first trees I planted, and it did actually have flowers on it this year. So it takes quite a few years before they produce flowers.
So this is my favourite tree.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes.
And this gives a wonderful scent of caramel in the autumn.
But I love when you can smell them before you actually see them.
And they give good autumn colour.
Just beautiful trees. This is one of the larger ones I've seen.
Of course, the prunus are always nice in the spring, but you get a couple of weeks of nice blossom in the spring. I've got another cornice I want to plant just here. It's terribly easy to plant them too close together when you put them in as young trees. Getting that they will get big. I remember when I planted this white betula, that was a focal point from the far end before the deer were there. Two oak trees in the field here, and the top one that was planted when Nicholas was born, the lower one, which actually lost a lower branch, and we had a sort of hurricane through from north. It knocked one big chunk of the tree, and that's a new growth, the darker green. And I put this seat here to commemorate the the National Garden Scheme. 2004.
So
They gave me a cheque for £40, which just paid for that. I had to buy the seed. This is one of the bigger corners. I always remember I had a French group I was taking round the garden several years ago. I said, this is a Cornus Cousa. I saw him, shake his head, and he didn't say anything. I had to sort of correct it.
this is the Korean form,
Oh, is it?
the Cornus Cousa.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I said it was something else, and he waved his head.
As we head back up the slope out of the arboretum, you start to get a sense of just how large the garden is. Major Tom's mother was Scottish by birth, so she had 6 Scots pines planted here on the bank to reflect her heritage. 4 have since been removed, but the 2 remaining pines certainly leave a towering impression over the arboretum.
Look absolutely amazing.
I really love this arboretum. Every time I have visited, it has provided a new experience, and it remains wonderful throughout the year. It was an absolute treat to experience it today with Major Tom. As we circle back around to the walls of the old kitchen garden, we thank him for his time. Approaching the top of the herbaceous borders, we are joined by his son Nicholas, who has been custodian of this great estate for several years now, and who is humbly following in his father's footsteps.
So the estate is about 3,000 acres, and very roughly that's about 1,200 acres of arable, and then 850 acres of woodland, which you get an amazing view from the house down what's sort of called the Golden Valley, because of the autumn colour. And then the rest is sort of grassland for sheep.
Yeah.
The history of the garden, I mean, I got a few drawings. There's certainly an engraving from about the early 18th century, which show the sort of garden very broadly laid out as it is now, but just a lot sort of softer. So all the sort of various stone ha-has and all that sort of thing were just sort of banks. Right. And I expect probably in the 19th century everything was sort of crisped up, and the sort of, I suppose, the Victorians' sort of desire to really sort of shape and sort of manicure the sort of countryside and things hang out. That's probably when all the sort of the stonework was added. So we're looking down the bottom herbaceous border here. There's a ha-ha, which that was just a bank, and then a series of terraces that go down to the house. They were just sort of gentle banks beforehand. Very broad overarching theme is that the sort of garden starts very formally up with the sort of the parterre and the herbaceous border and the structure of the UWalk, and then with the gradient, as the gradient just sort of falls away downhill, just becomes less and less structured, and I suppose ultimately down through the arboretum, just over the ha-ha and into the wider park.
So we're in the herbaceous borders, which we probably should talk about, seeing as we're here, and they are, I believe, the longest private herbaceous
Well,
borders.
that's it, and if you add enough caveats, we can always claim something of it. I think they're about 92, 93 metres long.
300 feet, I think.
That's about right. Yeah, no, they're fantastic. And amazingly, I don't know if Dad said, but when Dad took over, this right-hand border was twice the width and went right to the wall. Yeah. So it was probably 40 feet deep. So and there was plants at the back there, which probably never got seen. So Dad actually reduced the width. So you can enjoy the border from both sides. And then it must have been probably about 15 years ago we just totally reinvigorated the borders, so you get quite a bit of ground elder coming in. We'd started sort of losing a fight, so we had to take pretty drastic action. So everything came out, and we just planted heal everything in the sort of field just next to the garden. and just sort of ploughed everything up and sort of left a tarpaulin over it to sort of just suppress all the weed growth. And it did that. Took about a year. And then what was quite a nice idea is we put these York pavings, and that just means that the flowers can sort of spill onto the paving, and then we can mow them and keep it looking neat. It's quite a good little trick. We were worried how it's going to look, and thought it looked too sort of manicured, but actually I think it looks fine. So. And then we divided the borders up, so you can see, and that one's had a bit of ongoing TLC, but we divided them up into sort of squares with little gravel paths in between, purely from a sort of psychological point of view of, we'd weed that square rather than being faced with the whole thing. Well, they've been looking good, but they're sort of probably just past their best. Yeah, late June's probably their best, and what we're now is the middle of August. Still, the overall effect, I think, when you look down them or up, is it's great.
And of course you've used colour theory here to make them look even longer.
Yeah, no, exactly, yes. You can see you've got sort of blues moving right out to sort of warmer colours at the end.
The potentilla always reminds me of Miserden.
Oh, really?
For some reason. I'm not sure why, but I always look forward to seeing it when I can.
I think we've got a bit of a sort of stock of potentilla, and they sort of just get moved around. You redo your bed when we redid the parterre last autumn. And a few potentillas in there, so they get put up and so put somewhere else. Good bit of recycling, so waste not, want not, and all that.
What's your key interest? Is it the garden, the estate, the village?
I'm quite keen. Well, I suppose Dad's very keen on his forestry, which I'm sure came through when he was speaking to you earlier. So, and I've sort of definitely inherited a bit of that sort of passion for trees. No sort of horticultural expert, I'm afraid. But still a lot of learning to do. Not as knowledgeable as, anywhere near as knowledgeable as Dad, but just just sort of enjoy. I don't know. It's just something unbelievably sort of pleasurable about planting a tree. Yes. Like with the Bartram, the Bartram nurseries, tree nurseries.
Yes, of course, yes.
And their brochure is just amazing. So it's a look in there, pick a tree. Yeah, and then livestock, I enjoy the sheep, and I don't know do you see the 7 little belted Galloway steers at the bottom of the garden? Yeah. So they're a new addition. We've got a project with the Royal Agricultural University just up the road, and basically looking at conservation grazing and the management of sort of low input limestone banks for sort of wildflowers and then some butterflies. Yes. Yeah. It's fantastic. 38 of the sort of 56 butterflies are found here. So, and it's been a great year. It's been a great year for butterflies. Yes. Unbelievable year for butterflies. It's nice that people are sort of reconnecting with the countryside, I think, and then also subsequently from that, local produce and all that sort of thing, I think is fantastic.
As we come to the end of the herbaceous border and around the giant sycamore tree, the Golden Valley comes into view.
Like I said, Dad's passion was forestry, and if you can get in under those trees, it's fantastic. We sort of thin them every sort of 12 years or so, and the principle being is sort of continuous cover forestry, and that allows the light down to the sort of forest floor and brings up the understory and natural regeneration, and hopefully that's your next crop. Yeah, a lot of the forestry, a lot of it would have been cut for the war effort during the Second World War, so you see a lot of the plantations date from sort of mid to late 1940s. But I think was there a plane in the Second World War which the frame was made of beech?
Oh my goodness!
And but we got a letter upstairs in the attic thanking a Miserden effort for the provision of beech for these aircraft. Anyway, should we go through to the UWalk?
And now these are famously Edwin Luthor inspired, is that correct?
Well, that's it. Certainly inspired. We can't sort of prove the link, but and again they've sort of gone under some pretty dramatic sort of restoration in this last sort of it's probably over 4 years now. But so it's not particularly clear of a shape from this side, but we can see from the outside groups of 3 arches which sort of replicate the arches of the loggia, which is the sort of Luthor's design. So there's this sort of seems to be an uncanny similarity. So we're sort of wondering certainly if they're inspired by him. So we cut these back pretty dramatically. They were just getting very long. You can see where we've added a strip of grass. They're coming right out to here, and there's just too much weight on the sort of stems, and they were becoming very sort of wind and snow damage prone. So we took a sort of fairly drastic decision to sort of cut them right back. We did actually plant a sort of new row of yew trees just to sort of grow up and sort of knit together and create a sort of new edge. Where actually the growth that's been triggered from the cutback, it was sort of, we didn't need to plant them, so we took them all up. just extended the grass,
Yes.
the grass a bit, and I think in a few years' time they'll be back out to the edge of the grass. I mean, you can see the alcove either side of that urn, how narrow it did get. So it was pretty narrow. As time goes by, the hedges obviously grow and grow, and despite clipping them, they still just creep in. And you can always see that because the south face always grows more than the north side. So when you can see there's a much bigger gap that side than this side. Hopefully they're going to come back. And a trick I was told is, to really sort of trigger the regrowth is just with a wire brush, just to brush the stem,
Yes.
and that just exposes the green bark underneath.
Yes.
I'll give you many gardening tips, but that's one thing I've picked up in my short tenure so far.
And of course, it opens up that wonderful view as well.
Well, that's it, yeah. So Dad's real nicely framed by the wrought iron gate. I suppose this is quite an interesting little feature, which was, I believe, instigated by my great-grandmother, who had a sort of great love of children and just wanted to sort of design the garden to sort of be fun for children. And so every now and then there's these little cut-throughs, so children can run around and hide in through the hedge, through the UWalk, so it's quite sweet. But we can push through here actually, and we can go through to, after you, we can go through to the parterre.
The parterre garden sits to the north of the UWalk. It is a traditional quartered circle design with a sundial at the centre. Further up the slope in this section of the garden is a nod to the old kitchen garden that used to be contained within these walls. 8 raised vegetable beds surround a central urn. Throughout the year, these are planted out with vegetables raised in the nearby greenhouse. Further along are a selection of fruit trees and a netted enclosure for growing berries and currants. A rose swag running through the middle provides a lovely touch of romance and those ever-important wafts of perfume. The old stone kitchen wall on this side is softened and cloaked with plantings of a rich burgundy palette, made more vibrant by contrasting with a smattering of silver foliage such as stachys. This section of the garden also proudly displays the plaque for deservedly winning the Historic Houses Christie's Garden of the Year Award in 2018. As we reach the bottom of the parterre, the rille comes into full view and we see the house rising in front of us. The golden valley beyond peeks out from around the edges of the UWalk and over a row of pleached limes. It's the perfect opportunity to take advantage of the well-placed benches dotted around. With the gentle sound of water from the rille in the background, and with delightful butterflies fluttering by, the garden looks and feels serene.
So this was all replanted last autumn, and a couple of your favourite potentilla's again.
Potentilla's, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see that it's framed with hedge demander, and with a sort of lavender around the edge there, and a few sort of roses in the central sort of quadrants. But yeah, we get some good sort of show throughout the year with this current planting plan. So it's probably looking at its best in the spring, as we have a lot of tulips coming up through, followed by alliums, and that really creates a really nice sort of display earlier on, before the sort of parterre is really at its best.
From the parterre, you can see and hear the fountain in the rille.
It's always nice, I think, to have some sort of water feature in the garden. I think it just adds another element, doesn't it? Yeah. As if, obviously the valley and everything else wasn't calming enough. Yeah. Just needed to sort of really make it calmer. Historically, and it's amazing how estates have moved on with the times and everything else, and we have a nice sort of picture. There's actually a sort of family that lived here before us, and that was the Leathams, and they had a picture on the terrace in front of the house with all their sort of house staff and farm workers, and there was about 106 people sat there. Yeah. Extraordinary. And so obviously a village was used to house all them, and that's sort of very much an estate village. Through the sort of mechanisation of agriculture, obviously employees directly associated with certainly farming have sort of dropped right off. I suppose at the same sort of time, all estates have been diversifying and all that sort of thing, and redundant farm buildings being used for other sort of uses. Although the people aren't directly employed by the estate, yeah, there's still about 106 people relying on their estate for their livelihood, free of a diversification of farm buildings and all sorts of different trades, which is great. And it's great that Miserden's not unique in that respect. I think it's probably my father's generation that sort of experienced that most. So in that respect, it was still being run in its sort of slightly post-Victorian heyday. So for example, when he took over, there were 6 gardeners here and still a large number of staff. And I think it was very difficult for him to realise, and make those changes, and it was ultimately him that had to sort of do that, because of that generational gap, do that sort of change. Because you must have sort of gone away from everything he would have known, and the fact that he would have had his Christmases here with sort of, I imagine, a couple of house staff and obviously the 6 gardeners and everything else, and then to sort of see that all fall away must have felt like failure, but it sort of just had to move on and sort of adapt. And so I think he's done all the hard work. I've just got to sort of keep on going and sort of make a few more changes.
So you were saying you just sit inside with your feet up all day?
That's it, yeah, no, exactly, yeah.
I get that sense from you.
It's obviously a small nucleated village under single ownership. Yeah, so I suppose the biggest thing we did with regards to the village was the installation of a biomass district heating scheme. So the village was surrounded by forestry, and at the time, fuel prices were considerably higher then than they are now. All the properties have got sort of fibre optic broadband if they want, and then also we've got a 4G phone mast at the top of the village as well. So suddenly we've gone from 19th century to 21st century in a pretty short space of time. Yeah. It's a great challenge, and that's what Dad did so well in his tenure, is just sort of sensitively move things forward, because like I said, strangely everything has changed. And when I was growing up, this lawn, for example, was completely empty. There was nothing on here at all apart from a yew hedge, and then Dad initially added those urns just along the hedge just to break up, give it a bit of interest, and then as well as the pleached limes at the end, again just to sort of create a bit more of a sort of a room. And then it was his project to mark the millennium to create this rill which replicates the Cross of Lorraine, which you can't quite see, but it's just on the gable end of the stables. And all the stone, apart from the pillars on the summer house, and all the timber and the slate was all collected off the estate. So it was almost sort of made in house, which is fantastic.
Fits in perfectly with the arts and crafts movement.
Yeah.
Which had a big impact on this house. And so, you have 2 gardeners here now. 2
gardeners, and then there's one lady that comes in on a Monday, so part-time. I suppose through necessity, adopting much more of a whole estate team. So at peak periods, we've got a forester. So again, he comes in to help with sort of grass cutting in the arboretum and the hedge cutting, for example. So ebbs and flows.
The rill has a lovely calming effect, and turning around we see the tall gates of the UWalk, flanked on either side by another of my favourite plants, the silver weeping pear tree, Pyrus salicifolia pendula.
Yeah, the one on the right has always sort of struggled. The first one died and we replaced it. Hopefully we've just turned the corner. We just put a bit of wood chip mulch on it last autumn, and I think it just needs a bit more TLC than its neighbour. And again, the design of the rill with the little steps to say, when you come up the steps from that end and look along it, those little steps in the water just create that sort of ripple, so it's never still, which is quite nice. The house is Jacobean, built between 1620 and 1623. Originally it was a lot smaller, and then the top floor was added on in the 19th century, and then of course in the 20th century the Lutchins wing as well.
With the rill behind us, it is now time to turn our attention to the magnificent house. We head down towards the terrace which runs along the front for a close-up view. The house is shrouded by scented plants which are a particular favourite of Nicholas.
Well, the 2 things I particularly enjoy are the magnolia at the end, which obviously in early spring with its blooms and everything else is just amazing. And then the wisteria, there's 3 of them on the house, but the far one is just the most heavily scented, and it's just fantastic. And I think you can go and have a look at the stem, but I reckon it was probably planted at the same time as the new wing, so probably in the sort of mid-1920s. The stem's about 12 inches wide. But it goes the whole way along, and right up there. The smell is absolutely fantastic. Look, you can see the stem in here. It's sort of in there.
Oh my goodness!
It's an absolute monster.
That is a monster. It's looking so healthy.
Yeah, this end of the house was destroyed by fire in 1919, and then Lutyens was commissioned to design this end of this wing of the house. It's the 1920s, and he became quite good friends with my great-grandparents and stayed at Miserden quite regularly. My grandfather was ill in bed with flu at the time, and Lutyens drew some sketches to entertain them. My grandfather was only 4, and quite clever, where he drew half a picture on one side of a piece of paper and then half a picture on the other side, and then when you held it up to the light it makes a complete picture.
Turning around us so that the house is behind us, I notice some new plantings below us, a little bit past their prime now. The remaining seed pods from the poppy, Papaver somniferum, provide a teasing trace of their blooms earlier in the year.
It's nice, quite soft planting, a bit of lavender fringing along the front. It's funny how sort of planting sort of changes. When I was growing up, there's roses were the sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, roses everywhere,
Yes.
you know, and I think we sort of moved away from roses a little bit. Yeah, so this was all just roses. That was a border either side of the grass steps, that was also roses, and then the parterre, that was rose garden. And so added a bit of variety in the planting.
Hidden around the northeast corner of the Lutyens wing are additional garden features. A scented corner enclosed by yew hedges to retain the perfumed air is a delight the year round, with a succession of hyacinths, peonies, phlox and daphnes, amongst others. Against the hedges stands a statue of the Greek god Hermes, reaching up as he heralds news. Further around the corner we come to Butlers Walk. In the late afternoon, summer sunlight pours through cracks in the canopy overhead, highlighting the shaded area of the garden and its perfectly clipped mushroom-shaped beech trees. Just beyond the hedges here, the grass begins to slope away towards the forest, providing an elevated view of the descending treetops.
Yeah, we had a Slippy Slide when we were children as well, so that was pretty good to sort of slide down there as well. You get pretty good grass burns. You get up a good head of speed and come straight off the end and then straight onto across the lawn.
And then these little steps, I refer to them as the ha-ha steps.
Oh yeah.
Because you don't actually see them until you're riding.
Yeah. We usually plant lobelia in the sort of treads, just to sort of give it a bit of colour and a bit of sort of softness. But, next year they'll be back up in all their glory. It's funny, it's just home, yes. But it is sort of, there's no doubt it's, so when you're standing below it like this, it's pretty imposing. You can see the sort of castellation, the initial sort of house would have been, quite manageable. Yeah. Just 2 stories with a castellation on the top, and then with that top story added on in the 19th century, and then obviously that sort of third added on in the 20th century. Miserden sort of changed throughout the centuries. Yeah, I suppose it's got a sort of completely different story to tell, so it's not a sort of pure Jacobean gem, but it's sort of got a bit of a sort of moving history as it's sort of altered over the years. Yeah, it's cliche and cheesy, but it never gets old, never take it for granted, it's just fantastic. It's an absolute privilege. This is quite a nice gate. This was done when my parents got married, so my mother's called Penelope, so Tom Penelope Wills. So, and made in the village.
This has got to be one of the most spectacular trees.
Yeah, an enormous multi-stem sycamore. It's just the most extraordinary thing, because it must have been, I suppose, self-sown, then just left by successive generations of gardeners, and now you've got the sort of enormous specimen that you see now. When it was just a little sapling, or when it was just 12 feet tall, they must have thought, perhaps that's not growing quite in the right place, and just cut it down. So in fact, it's still here. It's amazing, really.
You can just imagine a few little hobbits.
Yeah. Just looking at that base where it's growing around those keystones. You've got a bit of root and an enormous couple of stones, and sort of a root, and the way that root comes right round. Funny, it always irritates the gardener, because everyone loves the tree and it's the only thing he has nothing to do with, like all the effort he spends in the garden, like making sure everything's looking absolutely immaculate, and everyone's like, oh, I love the tree.
I mean, one reason I love this garden is it's a family garden, it's tranquil, but there's this sense of timelessness about it. You sort of don't quite know when it happened. It feels like it's been here forever. Thank you so much.
Not at all, not at all.
Miserden has always held a very special place for me. It has such a wonderful sense of tranquility and peace, but also of family and history and legacy. And I'm always very conscious in these larger estate gardens of the burden of responsibility that comes with managing and looking after them. And it's just delightful to meet Major Tom and Nicholas and see how graciously they have taken on this huge responsibility, and it makes me feel very happy to know that Miserden is in safe hands for the foreseeable future.
So thank you for joining us on today's virtual garden tour. I hope that you have enjoyed it and have been able to see just how beautiful these gardens are. I'm highly appreciative and grateful for Major Tom and for Nicholas for showing us around and being so generous with their time. If you do have any questions on what you've seen today or on any of the plants, then please do put them in the comments below and we will endeavour to get back to you as soon as we can. And if you have liked today's virtual tour, then we will be releasing more over the next few months, so keep an eye out on our website and on YouTube, and please like and subscribe. And we look forward to bringing you into these absolutely stunning English gardens. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you again shortly. Bye.